The story of Jesus' ministry is full of powerful moments, healings, teachings, confrontations. But there's one event that stands apart. It's strange, mysterious, and profoundly important. It's the Transfiguration. On a high mountain, Jesus' appearance changed. He shone with a blinding glory, and he wasn't alone. Moses and Elijah, long dead, were there with him. For the three disciples who saw it, Peter, James, and John, it was a moment that burned itself into their memory. It was a glimpse behind the curtain. So what was this all about? How did this strange event reveal Jesus' glory? It wasn't just a magic trick or a light show. It was a deep and layered revelation of who Jesus truly was, where he came from, and where he was going. To understand it, we need to look at the context, the event itself, and what it meant for everyone involved. It was a message delivered not just in words, but in light, in history, and in a voice from heaven. To really get the weight of the Transfiguration, we have to know what happened right before it. Jesus and his disciples were in a region called Caesarea Philippi. It was there that Jesus asked them a crucial question: who do people say I am? They gave him the popular opinions. Some thought he was John the Baptist, come back to life. Others thought he was Elijah or another one of the old prophets. Then Jesus made it personal. But what about you? Who do you say I am? Simon Peter, always the first to speak, gave the right answer. It was a stunning declaration. You are the Christ, the Son of the living God. This was the turning point. For the first time, one of them said it out loud. They were finally beginning to see. Jesus confirmed Peter's confession, telling him this truth wasn't figured out by human intellect, but was revealed by God the Father. But right after this incredible high point comes a shocking low. Jesus immediately began to teach them what being the Christ, the Messiah, really meant. It wasn't what they expected. He told them he must go to Jerusalem, suffer many things at the hands of the religious leaders, be killed, and on the third day be raised to life. This was not the plan they had in mind. A suffering Messiah? A dying Messiah? It made no sense. The Messiah was supposed to be a conquering king who would free Israel from Roman oppression, not a victim of it. Peter, fresh off his divine revelation, took Jesus aside and actually rebuked him. Never, Lord, this shall never happen to you. Peter's heart was in the right place maybe, but his understanding was completely off. Jesus' response was one of the harshest in the Gospels. Get behind me, Satan. You are a stumbling block to me. You do not have in mind the concerns of God, but merely human concerns. He called his best friend Satan because Peter was trying to tempt him away from the path of the cross, the very path God had sent him on. The disciples were left reeling. Their whole world had been turned upside down twice in a matter of minutes. First, their teacher is the Son of God. Then, the Son of God is going to be executed. And to make it worse, Jesus then told them all that following him meant taking up their own cross. It meant self-denial and a willingness to lose their lives for his sake. The mood must have been heavy, full of confusion, fear, and doubt. They had just confessed him as the glorious Son of God, and now all they could hear about was suffering and death. The glory and the suffering seemed like complete opposites. They couldn't reconcile the two ideas. It's right here, in this moment of deep confusion and shattered expectations, that the Transfiguration happens. About a week later, Jesus took his inner circle Peter, James, and John and led them up a high mountain by themselves. This wasn't a casual hike. In the Bible, mountains are places where heaven and earth meet. Moses received the law on Mount Sinai. Elijah heard the still, small voice of God on Mount Horeb. So mountains were places of divine revelation, set apart from the normal world below. Jesus was taking them to a place where they could see things more clearly, and there, on the mountain, Jesus was transfigured before them. The word itself means his form was changed. Matthew's Gospel says, his face shone like the sun, and his clothes became as white as the light. Mark says his clothes became dazzling white, whiter than anyone in the world could bleach them. Luke says the appearance of his face changed, and his clothes became as bright as a flash of lightning. This wasn't just a reflected light like the glow on Moses' face after he had been with God. This was a light from within. For a moment, the veil of his humanity was pulled back, and the disciples saw a glimpse of his true, divine nature. This was his glory. In the Old Testament, the glory of God, the Hebrew word kabod, often referred to the visible manifestation of God's presence and power. It was the burning bush, the pillar of fire that led Israel, the consuming fire on Mount Sinai, the thick cloud that filled the temple. It was God making his invisible reality visible. Here, on this mountain, Jesus was showing them that he himself was the location of God's glory. The very presence of God was dwelling in him, and now that presence was shining out for them to see. This visual revelation answered the confusion they were feeling. They were struggling to hold the idea of a suffering Messiah together with the idea of a glorious Son of God. The Transfiguration showed them that he was both. He was the man they walked with and ate with, but he was also the radiant Lord of glory. The glory was real. Their confession that he was the Son of God wasn't a mistake. This dazzling light was a confirmation of his divine identity, a reassurance that, despite the talk of death, his true nature was one of ultimate power and life. But the revelation didn't stop with the light. Suddenly, two figures appeared with Jesus, Moses, and Elijah, and they were talking with him. This is an incredible detail. These weren't just any two figures from Israel's past. Moses was the great lawgiver, represented the law, the Torah, the very foundation of Jewish life and faith. It was Moses who led Israel out of slavery, who met with God on Sinai, and who delivered the commandments. He was the prophet who God spoke to face, as one speaks to a friend. Elijah was the great prophet. He represented the prophets, the long line of men who spoke God's word to the people, calling them back to faithfulness. Elijah was a figure of fiery power who confronted corrupt kings and false prophets. His life ended in a spectacular way. He didn't die, but was taken up to heaven in a whirlwind and a chariot of fire. Jewish tradition held that Elijah would return to prepare the way for the Messiah. So here they were, the law and the prophets, the two main pillars of the Old Testament scriptures. And what were they doing? They were standing with Jesus. They were talking with him. This was a powerful statement. It showed that Jesus was not a break from the past, but the fulfillment of it. The entire history of Israel, all the laws given and all the prophecies spoken, pointed to him. Moses and Elijah weren't there as his equals. They were there as witnesses, bearing testimony to him. He was the one the law anticipated. He was the one the prophets foretold. Everything in their sacred scriptures was culminating in this man, Jesus. Luke's gospel gives us a crucial piece of information about their conversation. It says they spoke about his departure, which he was about to bring to fulfillment at Jerusalem. The Greek word for departure is exodus. This is no accident. They were talking about his upcoming exodus in Jerusalem. This directly connects the glory of the Transfiguration to the suffering of the cross. Moses, the man who led the first exodus of God's people from slavery in Egypt, was now discussing a new exodus with Jesus. Jesus' death and resurrection would be the ultimate exodus, freeing not just one nation from physical bondage, but all of humanity from the slavery of sin and death. This conversation was a direct counterpoint to Peter's earlier rebuke. Peter had said, "Never, Lord. This suffering and death will never happen." But now, on the mountain of glory, Moses and Elijah are discussing that very suffering and death as the path to fulfillment. The glory and the cross were not opposites. They were two parts of the same plan. The path to glory, the path of the new Exodus, went directly through the cross in Jerusalem. The Transfiguration revealed that Jesus' glory wasn't a glory that avoided suffering, but a glory that was revealed through suffering. It gave a divine perspective on the very thing the disciples feared most. Peter, James, and John were overwhelmed. Luke says they were very sleepy, but when they became fully awake, they saw his glory and the two men standing with him. As Moses and Elijah were about to leave, Peter, likely not knowing what else to say, but feeling he had to say something, blurted out, "Lord, it is good for us to be here. If you wish, I will put up 3 shelters, one for you, one for Moses, and one for Elijah." This is such a human reaction. In the face of overwhelming divine glory, Peter wants to do something. He wants to build something, to make the moment permanent, to contain the glory in a structure. He's also, perhaps unintentionally, putting Jesus on the same level as Moses and Elijah. 3 great figures, each deserving of a shrine. He was still missing the point. He saw 3 heroes of the faith, but he didn't yet grasp the unique supremacy of Jesus. That Jesus wasn't just another great prophet in the line of Moses and Elijah. He was in a category all by himself. And just as Peter was making this mistake, God the Father intervened to correct him. While he was still speaking, a bright cloud enveloped them. This wasn't just a weather event. This was the Shekinah, the cloud of God's glory and presence from the Old Testament. It was the same cloud that covered Mount Sinai, the same cloud that filled the tabernacle. Yes, it was the unmistakable sign that God himself was present, and from the cloud came a voice. The voice said, "This is my son, whom I love, with him I am well pleased. Listen to him." This statement is the climax of the revelation. It's the Father's own testimony about Jesus. It echoes the words spoken at Jesus' baptism, but here, on the mountain, it has a new context and a new force. The Father directly clarifies who Jesus is, correcting Peter's well-intentioned but flawed understanding. This is my son. He is not just a prophet like Elijah. He is not just a lawgiver like Moses. He is in a unique relationship with the Father. He is the Son. This declares his divine identity and his supreme status. There aren't 3 equal figures here. There is the Son, and there are his faithful servants. Whom I love with him, I am well pleased. This is the Father's affirmation of the Son's life and mission. Even though that mission involved the path of suffering and death that so confused the disciples, the Father was pleased with him. The cross was not a tragic accident. It was part of the loving, divine plan. This was a direct comfort and confirmation for Jesus himself, strengthening him for the journey to Jerusalem. And then comes the command for the disciples. Listen to him. This is the crucial takeaway. Moses was great, and the law he brought was from God. Elijah was great, and the prophet's words were from God. But now, God's final and ultimate word to humanity is his Son. The authority of Jesus surpasses the law and the prophets because he is the fulfillment of both. The Father's command is simple and direct. Stop trying to build shelters. Stop trying to hold on to the past. Stop being confused. Instead, listen to Jesus. Follow his words. Trust his path, even when it leads to a cross. His voice is now the one that matters most. The effect of this was immediate. The disciples heard the voice and fell face down to the ground, terrified. This was a normal human reaction to a direct encounter with the holy presence of God. The glory was too much for them to bear. But then, Jesus came and touched them. "Get up," he said. "Don't be afraid." The same person who had just been shining with unbearable divine glory was now offering a gentle, reassuring human touch. He brought them back from their terror. When they looked up, the vision was over. Moses and Elijah were gone. The bright cloud was gone. The voice was silent. The text says they saw no one except Jesus. This is profoundly significant. After the majestic vision of the past Moses and Elijah and the direct revelation from the Father, the focus is brought back to the person of Jesus, alone. He is the one who remains. He is the one they must now follow back down the mountain and into the messy, difficult world below. The whole experience was designed to point them to him. As they were coming down the mountain, Jesus gave them a command: "Don't tell anyone what you have seen, until the Son of Man has been raised from the dead." Why the secrecy? Because the vision could not be properly understood apart from the resurrection. If they went down and told everyone they saw Jesus shining like the sun and talking with Moses, people would only get more of the wrong idea. They would try to make him a political king, a glorious figure who would never suffer. The full meaning of his glory was inseparable from his death and resurrection. Only after the cross could the glory of the Transfiguration be seen for what it truly was, a promise of the final victory that would come through sacrifice. So how did the Transfiguration reveal Jesus' glory? It did so in several powerful ways. First, it revealed his divine glory. It was a visible confirmation of Peter's confession. The disciples saw with their own eyes that this man from Nazareth was indeed the radiant Son of the living God. His true identity, usually veiled by his humanity, was allowed to shine through. This was a foretaste of the glory he possessed before he came to earth, and the glory that would be his again after his resurrection and ascension. It was an anchor for their faith, a memory they could hold on to when they saw him bloody and broken on the cross. The Apostle Peter, years later, would write about this very moment, saying, "We were eyewitnesses of his majesty." He received honor and glory from God the Father when the voice came to him from the majestic glory. It sustained him for the rest of his life. Second, it revealed his glory as the fulfillment of all of Scripture. The presence of Moses and Elijah was not random. It was a living tableau showing that Jesus was the goal to which the law and the prophets had always been pointing. He wasn't just another chapter in Israel's story, he was the point of the whole book. The entire weight of the Old Testament stood behind him, testifying that he was the one they had been waiting for. His glory was the glory of being the long-promised Messiah, the central figure of God's entire plan of salvation. Third, it revealed the glory of his mission. The conversation about his exodus in Jerusalem reframed the cross. The disciples saw suffering as a defeat, a tragic end. The Transfiguration showed them that it was a victory, a planned departure that would lead to liberation. It revealed that Jesus' glory wasn't found in avoiding the cross, but in embracing it. The path to resurrection glory went straight through the suffering of crucifixion. This was a difficult, world-altering truth. The glory of Jesus was a self-giving, sacrificial glory, completely different from the self-serving, power-hoarding glory that the world values. Finally, it revealed his glory as the ultimate authority. The Father's command, "Listen to him," elevated Jesus above everyone and everything else. His words were to be the final words. His teachings were to be the ultimate guide. The era of looking back to the law and the prophets as the primary source was ending. A new era was beginning, centered on the person and teaching of the Son. His glory was the glory of having the very words of eternal life, the glory of being the one to whom all must listen. The Transfiguration was a gift to those three disciples. It was given to them to strengthen their faith for the terrible ordeal that was to come. When they saw him arrested, mocked, and crucified, they could remember the mountain. They could remember the shining face, the heavenly visitors, and the voice from the cloud. They could know that the crucifixion was not the end of the story, but a necessary part of a much grander, more glorious plan. And the revelation extends to us. The story shows us the dual nature of Jesus, fully human, walking and talking with his friends, and fully divine, the radiant Lord of all creation. It teaches us that suffering and glory are mysteriously intertwined in God's plan. And it leaves us with the same simple, profound command that the disciples received. In a world full of confusing voices and conflicting authorities, the message from the mountain is clear. Look at Jesus, see his glory, and listen to him.